I literally thought I was losing my mind. My arms would go numb. My hearing actually would become muffled. You have a sense of you're in a dream. You can't breathe, you have chest pains. You might tremble, you sweat.
You just feel really bad. You might feel like an impending sense of doom. I get really bad anxiety if I don't do certain things in a certain way.
You want to be productive and you want to get all of these things done, but then at the same time, you find yourself very distracted and this self-wallow of like, I can't really do anything.
I didn't feel in control when it came to my thoughts. I was impulsive, lying a lot. I felt absolutely hopeless. I didn't think that there was a way to feel better. I didn't think that I wanted to feel better.
It's really hard to talk about, even to this day.
Our traditional ways of hospitalizing people, it's not working.
Mental illness and poverty, those things kill you.
Meds at one point were like $4,000 a month.
The whole asylum and people being restrained and locked up is not what we do now.
Mental illness is real. Our suicide rates are higher than they've ever been. People who have mental illness die sooner, so people are dying.
People think that you look at somebody and can see they've got a problem. People have mental illness and they look like normal people.
Couldn't afford the house, couldn't afford to take care of my grandmother. When people's minds break, they break.
Clarenberry and Behavioral Health, how can I help you?
Hi, Carmen, Dr. Lathia, you paged me?
We have a 23-year-old female in the emergency room who is suicidal. She overdosed on approximately 40 Cymbalta tablets. She does have a history of cutting. She recently started seeing Dr. Ingram outpatient. Poor sleep, poor appetite. Her UDS was negative. Her alcohol level was 0.059 at 11:30 a.m. She has no significant medical issues. Could I get admission orders for her?
What is that giant pumpkin or what's the name?
Yeah.
The outside in the terrace we used to sit, right?
Yeah.
You know that? It's very, very good. Actually, my father, he wanted one of us to become an actor. My dream was always to be a writer and a film director, actually. But then I got into medical school, and then I found out that medicine is something that I like, and psychiatry is something that is my passion now. Dal, yeah.
Bhavik, dal, that tadka dal. Yeah, and this is peppers with tofu. Because my son is vegan, older one.
Taking care of the brain, the mind, the psychosocial stressors, and having the compassion that's what psychiatry is, in my opinion. Okay, let's eat. I have two passions, my writing and psychiatry. Hopefully, through this medium, this documentary, we can actually let the people know to bring your family members right away. Don't waste time. You could, just like somebody had a heart attack, and if they need a stent placement or a bypass surgery, you have to bring them right away. If somebody has a first psychotic break or a first manic break, they need to come right away.
At first, you don't know where it's coming from. For me, a lot of times it happened driving down the road. So imagine you're cruising down the road 70 miles an hour, enjoying a good song. Then all of a sudden, you can't hear, your arms are numb, you can't breathe. You're convinced you're dying, having a stroke, or you're gonna lose your mind right there. And there's no safe place to go other than the shoulder of the road. And that's the type of fear that people live with that have it. They know that when it comes on, it's a trauma every time. You get re-traumatized with each panic attack. And I think that's how the disorder develops. Once you've had one, then you have another that kind of snowball.
I was feeling so dark and nasty inside that I was, seeking out situations that would take that feeling outside so that I could rationalize it, so that I could say, well, this is why I don't feel good. So a lot of hopelessness, a lot of impulsiveness, a loss of rationality, a loss of sense of self.
It's mind-boggling, it's frustrating, it's amazing at times. It's almost like being in this very toxic friendship. You're like, oh my God, yeah, let's go do all of these things. And you're like, oh my God, I have all of these other things at home that I should be doing. And you're just like, I'm having fun with my friend though. And my friend is ADHD.
What will happen to Fred now? What happens to all of them? The men and women from every walk of life who each year pass through doors like this, into the mental hospitals of our land. 3,200 men and women all gathered together in a modern mental institution, a city in itself, complete with every facility for effective treatment. A favorable environment and human comforts are essential in any therapeutic system.
You're producing an electrical disturbance of the brain, a gross disorganization of the usual patterns, and for some reason we don't understand, when the patient recovers from the treatment, they seem to be in a better state of mind.
Gonna do another one, Paul?
In the good old days, you would hear, yeah, my grandmother was in Traverse City State Hospital and she died there. We hear that. I've got one schizophrenic whose grandmother died there.
As a society, we have little tolerance for bizarre behavior, so we build huge institutions and look away.
If you look at all the countries, any country you go to, the old state hospitals, they were terrible. They looked like lepers' colonies.
No one seems to think that mental hospitals are the answer. At best, they're a holding operation until we think of something better.
About 60 years ago, there was very few medications. We really didn't have very much treatment as far as psychopharmacology was concerned. Even psychotherapy was not very well evolved. In the past, they used to do lobotomy in some patients. Patients used to get restrained. Sometimes they would lock the patients in a room. For example, a bipolar patient who is manic, they would just lock them. Previously, a very severe bipolar or schizophrenic, there was no way they could be maintained in the community. Because there was not very many medications, but they got a safe place to go, but they were locked there. They didn't even have a lot of visiting hours. And even if there was very little visiting hours, the family wouldn't want to come. It's like out of sight, out of mind. They used to be called asylums, and that image and that history is with people even now.
My aunt, I feel really bad for her because when her mental illness first started, she did go into the state hospital right away. And I'm not sure how long she was in there, but once she got out, my grandparents kept her at home. She didn't work anymore. She didn't go out on dates anymore. Her life became centered around this mental illness. Talking to my dad one day, he said, they never told us about that because they didn't want to burden us as kids. And I think it's something that you need to talk about. Mental illness is real. It's something that all of us can suffer from.
When I was a kid, we used to go to Traverse City to snowmobile races, and I remember how spooky that hospital was. Nobody in the community even wanted to talk about it, because, you know, we'd ask a lot of questions as kids. It was spooky. Huge fence around it. You never saw people. You didn't see anyone outside. You know, it'd be in the summer, and there's no one. It looked like a prison.
Places where the female patients can work. Now, you will work them. It was voluntary. I mean, this wasn't slave labor, like people in town were eventually talking about all the time. Too much.
This is not like the Disney World that you are taking a tour of, okay? These are real patients who are there. So you need to just tell them that this is what happened. Those kind of tours, you know, they need to be more sensitive to that. Somebody has a family member who has severe illness, or they themselves have a severe illness, then they feel terrible about those jokes. They don't like those jokes. I got referrals from all the primary care physicians, and they will tell me, and they will use the words like, this patient, you know, is really a cuckoo. And I tell them, I said, don't use that word. Although he's saying, oh, the patient is not here. I said, no, but don't use that word. You can use words like, I think he's psychotic or he's depressed, but don't use those words.
Have you ever worked in a mental hospital before?
Oh, sure. I know all about loony bins.
We prefer to think of this as a hospital where we treat sick people.
Well, I didn't mean nothing.
No, I realize you didn't.
A lot of people, they say, you know, man, I had a panic attack today. I forgot my lunch money, or I locked my keys in my car. I think that is so overused, it's a little bit insulting, because if people understand a clinical panic attack, it has nothing to do with willpower, it has nothing to do with whether you're masculine or feminine. A panic attack has to do with brain chemistry.
I encounter professionals who don't know that I have a diagnosis, and it's almost like being a fly on the wall, because I've heard some really wild things said about BPD when the assumption was that there was no one with it in the room.
A lot of people say, oh, I'm going to go kill myself, and I realize like how offensive and how hurtful that could be. And a lot of people just say, oh, I have anxiety, when they're just feeling anxious in a moment.
When someone has gotten to know me, when a coworker has gotten to know me and said something ill-informed about borderline personality disorder, all it has taken me is to say, I have borderline personality disorder. And I've even been told, well, you don't seem like you have BPD. Well, what does that look like?
Even that sensitivity, I mean, I have to be honest about it, it takes some time for, like, it took a lot of time for me to learn that sensitivity, with the words that I use, or about the way I approach a patient, or even the family members. It takes some time, but it has to be there.
Hey, how you doing?
When I first started having my problems, I would get manic, and then I would be depressed, and it cycled like every 3 or 4 days. It was like being on a roller coaster. When I was manic, I couldn't sleep and I couldn't eat. And then because you don't sleep, I crashed. I would be in bed for 3 or 4 days. And how do you take care of children when that's what's going on with you?
If things go all right in life, I can navigate through it and don't be so down, you know. I don't have to have medication. People don't really know that living with pain is just unbearable. It's unbearable.
It was very, very difficult because I had no idea what was happening to me. The high, and that's when I did the things that were absolutely not me. Hypersexuality, drinking more alcohol. I had an affair, feeling that someone cared about me since I didn't really care about myself. And knowing that that was wrong, I didn't want to do it. I love my family, love my children to death, but it's like I had no control whatsoever. I've been in therapy and had this since 1976 probably, and it's taken me probably 30, 35 years to get past that guilt.
I don't have the medicine that I need because the co-payment on one of the medicines that did work was $125, which actually is kind of stupid because you would forfeit $125, whereas the actual medicine what Medicare pays for is $700 for a refill. So I can't afford that. That's gonna cost me, but I'm on disability because of anxiety, bipolar depression, And then a lot of times I think if things were okay, I won't have the problem.
One of the first things I hear from a lot of people is that they're stressed about money. But directly, because they don't have enough to cover their basic needs, or indirectly, like, well, I can't afford to keep a car, so I can't get to a job, so I can't this and I can't that. That's like the first or second thing out of most people's mouths when they come in. Who in that situation is going to say, well, let's tack on a massive medical bill for me to walk into a hospital with this crisis, and then to see a doctor, and then to see a counselor, and then to pick up meds every month? It seems insurmountable.
In the 70s, it was like 1977, there wasn't help like there is now. I did end up in mental health in Saginaw for several days. Didn't help. They did a lot of shock therapy on patients, and they would come back and they would just sit like zombies for a couple of days, and I thought, oh my gosh, this is going to be me if I can't straighten my life out.
More than 100,000 people are shocked every year. This woman is about to get a series of treatments. She is in her early 30s, married, the mother of 2 children, and she's depressed.
I know in India, they used to do it as outpatient. So it was not even done in an operating room. Many countries it was done in an outpatient. So there'll be 30 people waiting outside, and the psychiatrist will be waiting there with an assistant with the electrodes. Like, okay, I'm going to burst 30 people today. And they used to use that word before very loosely. If a patient is waiting in the line, it looked like the slaughterhouse, although we know that ECT works very, very well. The whole protocol of how to do the ECT has gone through a lot of revisions. In my opinion, it's like really giving a jump start to the brain. It actually increases the permeability of the membrane. So when you take a medication, it takes some time, ECT does. So we see robust response with ECT, but that visual has still stuck. We always are struggling with that.
I don't think they really knew how to deal with people back then, and so the big thing was, oh, you just need more sex. It's like, no, because that's the last thing that I wanted. I didn't feel worthy to be even touched, and it's like, no, that's, so I didn't stay with him for sure, and there just wasn't the psychiatrist around that were able to help people.
That was a psychiatrist?
That was a psychiatrist. So I thought, whoa, that's definitely not where I'm going.
I think one of the saddest things I see is parents with kids not helping them become a part of the community so the community can open their world up.
Do you mind your mother talking for you?
That's fine.
Yeah. Yeah. Is it just easier sometimes?
It's easier. A lot of words don't come out of my mouth.
So you were saying that there were some medical professionals who wanted to put Nathan away.
Yeah, because they
That was in 2005. I couldn't get really those old records. I did talk to Dr. and he remembers that everybody in the unit felt that he shouldn't go back.
Yes, and I remember Dr. telling me that he never felt that he'd be able to get him under control with medications, that he was going to need to be institutionalized. They were going to place him in Carroll during that first admission because for some reason they thought he was homeless and had no support, and it was like, no, we're going to work on the medications.
This is the story of an incredibly persistent mother. Incredible, really. She did everything to fight. I think only mothers can do this.
But it worked.
The community mental health movement started in '63. President Kennedy signed the CMH Act, the Community Mental Health Act in '63, which initially gave federal funding to sites throughout the country. Not very ubiquitous, though. They were in Michigan about 11 sites. And then over time, to be frank, federal funding abated, mostly because of the Vietnam War. And so what happened is states started to step up. And then in the 70s and 80s, the state realized people didn't need to be medically incarcerated in state mental hospitals, so they could begin to live lives that are fully in the community. So the CMHs were the ideal support mechanism.
All right, so we'll make sure every door has to be closed when we go in or out for the safety. So like anytime you guys walk out, just close it. When you're being admitted to a mental health unit, you want to feel like you're at a place where people are going to be kind, warm, that type of thing. Especially if you've never been in a mental health unit. It is the most scariest thing you can go through because the stigma of mental health is what is our hardest barrier. As far as the hospitals go, I think they're trying to make improvements so you're not seeing people just locked up forever. A local community hospital like McLaren Bay Region has a behavioral health unit where people come and they stay in the hospital. And the goal of that type of a hospital is, let's get them in. They might be having suicidal thoughts, maybe they're having homicidal thoughts, but they're not safe to be out in the community at that point. A danger to themselves or a danger to someone else. So we get them into the hospital, we get them stabilized on their medication, and then they get to go home again.
And how is she presenting right now in the emergency room?
She's surrounded by family. Like I said, she's guarded, but she's very sad.
Okay, so she's very depressed.
Very depressed, and yes, there's clearly some stressors, but she's not forthright with what they are right now.
Okay, but she is agreeing to sign voluntarily, so we do not have to petition her or anything.
Correct.
Okay, so admit under Dr. Nicholas, diagnosis major depression, voluntary patient. She has no home bed, so we will not give anything. Okay. But she has been drinking quite a bit of alcohol, it looks like. Yeah. So let's start her on the alcohol detox protocol with Cerex. Okay. And we will give Haldol 5 milligram PRIM Q6 hours PRN, and Wistril 50 milligram PO Q6 hours PRN, and voluntary patient admit under Dr. Nicholas, and that's about it.
Okay, thank Thank you, Dr. Lathia.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
My contact with them is that someone concerned about them petitions the court saying, my son, my nephew, my father is behaving erratically, threatening that he's going to commit suicide. So someone in the family files a petition saying this person needs mental health help but won't seek it and doesn't appreciate that they need the help. The petition brings them to the hospital's attention and gets them examined. Then an attorney must call on them. That's where I come in. Come in, explain what's happening to them, explain their rights, and at that point, the patient has the opportunity to put themselves back on the path of a voluntary patient. They can sign what's called a request to defer their hearing, that is, set it off indefinitely, and give them a chance to follow up on their mental health treatment voluntarily.
All right, so this over here is the therapy room. We have to be upfront with them right in the beginning, and it's really hard, to tell them that their mother petitioned them to come into the department. And then the doctor certified that they agreed with it. So that's often difficult. But I tell you one thing, they don't leave mad. Our patients don't leave upset, they don't leave mad, they leave grateful. And that's probably the easiest part, is to see, when you see somebody come in so upset and angry that they were admitted to a mental health unit, and you get to see them walk out, thank you for the help that you gave me. It's a nice feeling.
This is what we do usually. This is 2 or 3 minutes is what we spend. Because we have 5 admissions in the night, which I can't spend like a lot of time, and I don't need to. The decision I have to make is whether I admit or not admit, whether it's a voluntary patient or petition. The family is supportive, she's agreeing to come in, we'll start the detox from alcohol, and then once we evaluate her, we start on the antidepressant and other things, and then discharge them.
Our major depression is the biggest diagnosis on the unit here. And psychosis is another huge one. Psychosis is the most heavily diagnosed in the whole hospital because there's just so many things that can cause psychosis. It doesn't always have to be mental illness. It could be your blood sugar uncontrolled and you're not thinking correctly. So a lot of times when we go down and screen, those are the things that we have to evaluate. Is this medical issue? Because you certainly don't want to put somebody in a mental health unit when they're really suffering from a medical emergency that's related to their physical health versus their mental. So that's why we do what's called a screen, and we evaluate the patient before they come into the unit.
What did you have before the mural? So the concern wasn't painting nothing, so it was just
It
bare
was-
walls.
Yeah, it was ugly. How about that? So,
It's not ugly anymore.
and I wanted it to feel like you were just getting therapy. Like if you have to go to a retreat, what does that feel like, You want to see pretty pictures and where you feel like you're not somewhere where you can't leave.
Sanctuary, refuge, hospital. This is no snake pit. The doors are locked, but it's not a prison that we enter. For these locks are meant to protect patients. No longer able to take care of themselves, they depend on others to help them live from day to day.
A state hospital, if you think about it, provides food, clothing, shelter, incredibly high staffing ratios. And there was a time where state hospitals made a lot of sense. The medications were nowhere near as good as they are now. And they were really expensive. Now, people, through Medicaid coverage and even non-Medicaid can get really good psychotropic medication to live in the community. The supports are really good. We can help people with housing, employment. They can get what are called natural supports. They can live with their parents, their friends, their roommates, people buy their own homes, get jobs, none of which could have happened in the state mental hospital. So the only downside, of course, is that in a state mental hospital, you're protected from homelessness. You tend to have a job of some type. In the community, those are harder to come by. And if you live in poverty, there's a low-income housing shortage, and it's hard to get employment if you're disabled.
I think it might have been a year ago. I was sitting in church. My landlord called me and said that they're thinking about buying the building. So for me to come and sign the lease, because Holly, if you don't sign a lease, they can get rid of you the next month. And this is true, and that did happen. So here you got people that bought the building, and then the next month, these people have to get out. Each and every one of my neighbors, you seeing them leave. It was awful. It's an awful nightmare. My increase would have been close to $300 for 4 months, and then $500 after the 4 months. And don't think a day go past, I don't think October the 1st was the time when they said that I would be having to get out of my apartment. And then I know it's silly, but then yesterday I said, how many more months I got till this lease is up? And then sometimes I think, what if the owners of the old place come and buy this place too? So I do still have a lot of anxiety about that.
This is just some of my Wonder Woman stuff. I've got Wonder Woman lava lamp. Wonder Woman Gal Gadot like you would buy in the store, not Barbie brand. When I grew up in the very fundamentalist charismatic movement, as a kid, I think I didn't have a full-blown panic attack, but I had something akin to it. We went to see a play called Judgment Morning Ministries.
She had endeavored to train the child in the ways of the Lord. Well, let's see what happened to them on Judgment Day.
And these people they were a traveling troupe, and they would go from church to church.
Never go to church with me anymore.
The play opens up, and you can see heaven on one side. People are dressed as angels, very smoky, and yet look beautiful. But the other half of the stage was dark, and they played this ominous sound, and the darkness actually opened up, and men came out dressed as demons. They had skull faces, and it was just black lights and the red, it looked like real fire behind them. And even as a kid, I had that same numbness that I couldn't articulate at the time. I grabbed a hold of my mom and I whispered in her ear, I said, I can't stay in here. It makes me kind of feel bad for that little boy. I mean, I knew who I was.
I got another one, do you like Lambrusco? I had a very bad experience. One of my patients stopped the medications because the family said that you don't need medications and God will save you. And he had a very serious suicide attempt. He almost died. Thank God he survived, but that actually really opened the eyes of the whole family. I got another patient, a gay man, he killed himself because they tried to convert him.
I'm just going to show you, I'm not ashamed. As a kid growing up, when we'd play war, they'd have guns. My first grade teacher helped me make construction paper bracelets that were yellow, and she cut out the red stars on them. So they'd shoot at me and I'd pew, pew. Which is a pretty cool teacher. And then the Gal Gadot version of the headband. I wouldn't wear this in public. I did once on a dare, but just certain things speak to us. I was always involved with the music and the drama and the youth group. It was the spiritual connection that I think meant a lot to me. But I always knew there was something different about me that I could not talk about. Got engaged to the music director's daughter. And then probably 6 months before we got married, I said, Stephanie, I gotta be honest, I can't do this. I'm gay. They actually had a church service when they were trying to pray the gay away. They were trying to cast the demon of homosexuality out of our family. And it crushed my parents and it crushed me at the same time. And that kind of made me feel like I was flawed somehow, that I would come out of the closet and it's like, all right, I've disappointed God now. I've made God mad. I don't deserve to be part of this community. What I didn't know was that genetically, I was predisposed to panic disorder. And that was the right impetus to trigger it. I had this horrible internal struggle. It's like, if I were to die tonight on my way home, I'd go to hell.
If 1 in 5 of us have a mental illness and only 48% or 40% or so get help, that leaves a tremendous amount of people out there in pain. Our suicide rates are higher than they've ever been. People who have mental illness die sooner, 26 to 28 years sooner than people that do not have mental illness. So people are dying.
There was actually a time where I actually had a plan. For me, it was a lot of different circumstances. I think it was just where I was in my life and the feeling of unhappiness and then having depression on top of that and then feeling alone and not being able to essentially talk about my feelings in a way that I feel confident today. Growing up in my community, a lot of people don't talk about their emotions. My life has always been living in trauma, and that was just because you never really know what to expect growing up Black in America. At any moment, you know what I mean, someone can decide that you're not worth it.
I actually remember coming downstairs one morning and Mom was gone. I thought, well, she must be sick, she hurt herself. And he took us there and he just said, oh, Mom's sick. And I'm like, okay, 6, 7 years old, you don't question anybody, you just take what they're saying for a word. And I remember her coming home and giving me this puppet that she had made. And I thought, well, wow, I'm not sure what kind of sick she was, but she had a good time when she was there. And it wasn't until I was probably about 12, it took about 5 years before anybody even talked about it. Nobody said, well, your mom was in a mental hospital, she had problems. They just told you that she was sick. So as a 6-year-old, you think she hurt her stomach, she hurt her leg, broken arm, I didn't know. And it wasn't until I was about 12, and I think Mom actually brought it up to us and said, well, this is what really happened to me. And I look back now and I see the puppet and I'm wondering, yeah, I can see why, it was a therapy thing for her. I, at 6, didn't understand why she had left. I knew that she was there for a couple months of, they explained to us that Mom and Dad's getting a divorce. We understood as much as a 6-year-old's going to, and that they're not going to live together. Mom's there for a couple months, and then all of a sudden, Dad's there, and Mom now moved out, and we didn't know why. And they didn't explain to a 6, 7-year-old why. But keeping it from us probably wasn't the best answer either, because we had questions, but we never felt like we could ask those questions. We just kept it inside, never talked about it. It was a hidden subject.
I look back on those years between the mid-1970s and 80s and keep saying, who was that person and Coffin began seeing a therapist regularly during the 1990s, but it wasn't until nearly 2000 that she says she got the help she needed.
When this article first came out, had your mother told you ahead of time that she was working with the Bay City Times?
She did. She did. And I remember when the article came out, my dad, why does she got to put our last name on there? He was still very embarrassed to be associated with mental illness.
You guys want to go potty? Want to go potty? Come on. Outside, Kaiser. Let's go potty. Come on.
I think it's important that if anyone even suspects it, to go to a mental health professional and let them evaluate you. I mean, because they'll ask the right questions. They'll put things into words that you couldn't put into words before. I didn't know panic disorder and what it meant, but once I went and saw my first therapist, he said, "Do you ever feel this way?" I was in shock, because I thought, I'm not going crazy. There's an actual list of things that people like me have, and he said, "I've got some good news for you, Noah." He said, "It's treatable." And then he said, "But I have some really bad news. It's never going away." He said, "You will learn how to manage it, but it's never going to leave."
When this started, I would sit on my husband's lap crying, and the doctor said, family doctor that I'd seen for a long time, "Well, if you just pull yourself up by your bootstraps, okay, this would be better. You could handle it." And then when I went to someone else, they would say, when I was manic, it would be, you just need to go taken out behind the barn and given a good whooping, because that would take care of what you're doing right now. That isn't true. That isn't true at all. You need some kindness, some understanding. Good people can do bad things, and bad things aren't because you want to do them many times. It's because of the things that you go through in life.
I'm proud of her. We do bad things in life, things we can't take back, things we can't change, but we can still make it better. And this article helps one other person, just one, makes a difference.
I think doctors weren't sure what to do with me, and this was like in the early 2000s, so like things have changed now, but I've had a lot of labels attached to me that I don't think really apply. A lot of them are still stuck to me. All these labels were given to me to like get me the services I needed, to get me on these medications and to get me these like therapies and stuff that I was given. Maybe I needed to have those labels applied for insurance reasons. I don't know. I do think doctors were just like trying to figure out and like pin something down to like write off and say this is it and this is what we need to do. But I got like a dozen different diagnoses instead and wasn't really treated for what I needed to be treated for, which was autism. It's really something you have for life and is fundamentally the way your brain works differently versus something you might develop and learn better coping mechanisms and be able to fit in better with society. A lot of times I'll say something that like seems obvious to me and I'll have someone around me say like, "Oh, I didn't like understand it that way." And a lot of times the same thing happens with like neurotypical people. Like they'll say something, I'll be like, "Oh, I didn't see it that way." And it turns out like everybody else sees it that way. This is like kind of silly to say, but like, I don't know, it's unique. It makes me unique. Lets me see things differently, I guess. I actually requested recently from my mental health services all my records dating back over 10 years.
What are you hoping to find through those records?
All the stuff I don't remember.
I've tried Zoloft. There was this other prescription that was for like low blood pressure, but there's been studies on it that helps with anxiety, and it just made me feel like a zombie. Zoloft also made me feel like a zombie. And honestly, it was just a very huge turnoff.
With a hypomanic episode, it felt like finally, after all the struggles, I finally have arrived at this place where I feel like the perfect version of myself. Next thing you know, I feel so great. The rules, they don't apply to me. Adderall one way, alcohol the other way. There was one night where I had somehow locked myself out of my apartment. And so I kicked in the back door, and then that broke off these wood shards from the door frame. Next thing I know, I'd taken one of those, shoved it up my chin. Next thing I know, I'm sort of getting drug out of my apartment, full restraints. I'm being wheeled on a stretcher, sedated me, woke up. Nobody came and checked on me. I'm in there for 6 hours restrained, staring at the ceiling. Found a dual diagnosis facility. Dual diagnosis meaning mental health plus substance. It was like 5 or 6 AA type meetings a day. And then I saw a psychologist once the entire 2 weeks that I was there. So I left. So it's just a fully developing, untreated manic episode.
Something that stands out as dehumanizing for me was taking this medication that I knew wasn't right, was making me feel terrible, was making me feel sedated, and verbalizing that. You have to do your best to be on your best behavior and be nice and calm, or otherwise, you can't get your way, or you're manic, or you're out of line, or you need to go settle down. So I was verbalizing that this medication wasn't working for me. I wasn't feeling like myself, and that was written down in a book as a strike against me. It was a bad thing that I had done. So I realized at that moment that I really can't advocate for myself here. That's what it felt like. I felt like I couldn't advocate for myself because I was being unruly or non-compliant. And at the time, I didn't feel that there was anyone there to advocate for me either.
None of us are perfect. But you know how it is, Doctor. You get to know some of these patients, you get to like them, some of them. Patients like Mr. Rusk, a few others, get better. I thought I was in something real big for a while, something where I was doing some good. And I messed it all up.
It's hard enough to walk in and say, I need help. And then we have so many requirements regarding paperwork. So when someone walks in, we need to be welcoming and we need to say, we're here to help you. And I think that we try really hard to do that. But when you have to do a full assessment on the first day and you have so many days to get the person in, I think those are all really good rules, but it's also a burden in the fact that then you're not sitting there with the person in front of you and not worrying about paperwork. We've been doing this for a long time. We need to make improvements. We acknowledge that, but I don't think it's broken. I think we're serving a lot of people. I think that we're doing it better than we've ever done it. We know that about 43% of people who are dealing with mental illness don't come into treatment. This is a treatable illness that people can get help for and can live full lives.
You really need to see a psychiatrist and get some therapy, because even psychiatric care, having the medication, doesn't take care of it. You have to have therapy along with it to be able to work out your issues. I know I wouldn't be here if it wouldn't be for the psychiatric help that I found, the medications, and my children and grandchildren.
They're not all willing to realize that they have a problem or that there's help out there and it's okay to ask for help. We all need help occasionally in life, and it's not bad to ask for it. It shouldn't be embarrassing to say you have a problem and to ask for help.
Part of the barrier in my own recovery and getting started was my mom had to figure out where to get me insurance because we didn't always have it. And my mom was always someone who worked 2, 3, 4 jobs. And now I see, working in a community mental health, we have people who have state insurance, which is great if you happen to be lucky enough to qualify and get a ride into DHS and have someone to help you fill out paperwork if you need help and get to the hospital for your initial appointment. Now, once that's all set up, yes, sure, we can go grab somebody and we'll bring it in, we'll come to your house. I mean, I beat doors down all the time. But the disconnect there is that, especially in rural communities, there are a lack of free clinics. There's a lack of transportation to get folks in to just get the help they need.
Let me get myself together because I don't want to be crying. Okay. I think the biggest challenge we have is funding and not knowing if we're going to continue to have funding. And because we are Medicaid, and the majority of the people that we serve are pretty severely disabled, not just with mental health issues, but the majority of our funding goes for individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities who have significant physical as well as cognitive issues. And so, you know, if Medicaid gets cut or if our system gets privatized, my biggest concern is that we won't be able to serve the individuals that we're serving the way we're serving them. So that's the biggest thing, is managing the public funds and providing the care that we need to provide for the individuals that we serve.
I don't even know where to start with that. He was in the age group where he couldn't stay on our insurance after, 18? We pay cash. It all adds up. And you buy all these medications, you pay $1,000 for a script, and it doesn't work after taking 7 of them, and you throw that one out and you start all over again. And his teeth, Medicaid Dilant ruined his teeth when he was a kid, and now he's having to have all of his teeth crowned because he clenches his teeth at night, so he's fractured all of his teeth and they're all wore right off. So that's like $2,000 for 2 teeth.
Becky, the insurance didn't cover much of it, did it?
Oh my God, no. By the time he was in, he had no insurance. We couldn't even afford to pay for his insurance. He doesn't have insurance through his job. And we tried to get him on Medicaid, but since he lived with us, his household income was too high to get him on Medicaid, so we just had to pay for everything. Meds at one point were like $4,000 a month. And obviously milk and cows, he couldn't pay for them. Grab me a Kleenex.
It is really very unfair because the insurance companies don't look at mental health the same as they look at the physical health.
They don't.
And it is still an issue. So, you know, the private insurance should cover the mental illness.
What do you like to do?
Milk cows.
What do you like to do for fun? You do anything fun?
Work in my workshop. He just finished that one about a month ago. Intarsia. You just cut these pieces out and you put them back together like puzzles, you know, and it takes quite a lot of patience to cut them out good and a lot of sanding.
I didn't do that one yet.
This is one you're planning on doing soon?
Someday.
Yeah, I work with a few people. I'm always trained.
Here's one of his, this is a cutting board that he made. That's black oak, or a black walnut oak and white oak. It's So he still don't talk a lot. It's all up here. He just can't make it come out of his mouth the way he wants to, you know.
The community is probably the biggest reason he's as functional as he is, because the community helps him. He does his own banking. They help him. The auto parts store guys know him. Everybody's there and supportive. Yeah, it takes a village to raise a kid, you know.
It's really unfair when you talk about someone who needs attention or needs care, can't afford it. I've had patients right now who have to make a decision about medication, and they'll tell me, listen, I can't afford the $3 medication. I need the $1 medication. So you would say, well, come on, $3. But if someone's really struggling that much and saying, I need the $1 medication at this point, there's other things that are going on with it. So I think that's part of the issue. It's not a priority for us in our country. We view it as, this is America. Get yours like I got mine. Patients who will go without treatment, they cost us. If you look at the number of patients we're seeing in the forensic setting, in the jail setting, many cases, these are folks who failed outpatient treatment. The shift is going from basically outpatient treatment to criminal justice treatment at the time, which is much more expensive. Our whole system could be corrected and needs help at this point, not just mental health.
One look at a state hospital and any layperson would say, okay, this is a prison. In fact, some asylums, like the Upper Peninsula Asylum, were literally converted into prisons. Since the end of the asylum model, we have seen the rise of mass incarceration. When there was deinstitutionalization, a lot of these patients did become homeless, and they were arrested by the police and put in jail. This is something that we see all the time.
When I was in prison, I received 2 quote-unquote official mental health assessments. These were given simply because the majority of my time spent there was in trying to get transferred into mental health court. But in order to get into that court period, you have to prove to the first judge that your crimes were causally connected to your mental health disorder. What they did is they just scheduled me for one first assessment. They read off some generic questions, things like, at the time that you committed the crime, did you feel that you had a superpower? The answer is no, but there's a whole lot of other things I thought. I would definitely not say that prison is the best place for people experiencing mental health disorder to get the support that they need. It seems like they are already the easiest to neglect. And so with that mentality, I think you also get this sort of a dumping ground that goes back for centuries, just wanting to remove people from society.
When somebody goes to the prison for a crime that they've committed because of their psychiatric symptoms, it's very hard to release them and then transfer them to the state hospital. This is unbelievable. So many patients, they just are, their life is done once they go to the prison. There are studies showing that a lot of them have been assaulted, they've been raped, then they become worse because of the whole trauma. But that's something that has to change. That has to change. I don't know what's going to happen next.
Hello. So let's see. Well, things are going well, considering there's a lot to be nervous about, a lot to be anxious or depressed about. I just think we live in a time that lends itself to people becoming, afraid, people living in despair. We've had an uptick in suicides. The biggest threat to public health and safety in some ways is mental health. If people can't function within society, within their jobs, if they can't function in their roles as a parent, if they can't function in school, then it's as debilitating as having a deadly or infectious disease. Fall has been it is a hard time of year, and every time October rolls around, there is a bit of dread that something's going to happen again.
I left my position in social work. I started working another low-stress job so that I could get back to school, and then the world went topsy-turvy. In terms of my mental health, I saw a relapse or uptick in symptoms. I was able to speak with a psychiatrist to change my medications. I now talk to my therapist via text. I can't really imagine anyone in the world right now walking around just hunky-dory with the way that things are going. I think that we are all experiencing anxiety and depression.
A lot of my patients suffered a lot. Some of them lost, their near and dear ones. The worst thing is, like, our patients, particularly depressed and anxious patients, we tell them to socialize, to help them with their depression and anxiety. And this is the first time we told them to not socialize.
October is always a scary month for me. I actually hold my breath, metaphorically and literally, as the month changes. And I'm going to share something that I didn't share before. The reason I don't share this is a lot of people would say that's what made me gay. But October started being a bad month for me when I was raped. I was 18 years old, and I was raped by somebody who was my superior at a fast food restaurant. And they got me extremely drunk. And it was probably the lowest point in my life. There's a part of me that is still haunted by that. In October, we open the windows to let the death out. The cold air is purging, and the decay around us is imminent. It's beautiful in some ways. And so, it's not easy in October.
We're heading and sliding into winter, so that's very difficult for me because I'm finding that I'm already getting depressed. I had to increase my medication yesterday. I mean, I'm exhausted, but I wake up in the middle of the night for 2 or 3 hours and can't go back to sleep because I kind of have things running through my head. So that's what I'm hoping, that with the increase in the medication that I will be able to sleep all night.
Given the current climate of the nation and with the pandemic, it's my understanding that more people are suffering more, and that's causing a need for more mental health care. And you can't have a bunch of people sitting in a waiting room for a half hour.
As I kind of exited social work, I saw a great rise in the need for it. So since then, I've been kind of volunteering my time and my skills as much as I can while not being affiliated with an agency. A lot of the peers that I'm still connected to are providing services online or over the phone via Zoom calls like this one. We've really adapted to the state of the world, and we adapted quickly.
The pandemic has been challenging, truly. I was homeless for 44 days before I secured this space and was able to move into it, my roof collapsed, and with that, there was like a leak. So I was pretty much like couch surfing. It was hard, truly, to not only have to advocate for myself while being homeless, while also trying to find a place to live. It was the longest 44 days of my life. And on top of that, we're in a pandemic, it was finals week. So it can be hard sometimes, truly, to find yourself in all of that, you balance, and yeah, especially when you don't have the space to do that.
In the past year, well, Nate decided to quit taking his meds this summer, so we had an event. Basically wound up with medication changes. That's actually been a blessing because we've changed medications from the Risperidol to Invega, and it's actually been a good thing. You know, at first it's like, oh my God, here we go. But we didn't wind up with an admission. The new medication worked immediately. And we only had like a bad week after that, and things are doing quite well. You like the new meds, don't you?
Yeah.
In fact, his speech is better, talks more. We're just at the beginning of starting the medication, so we'll see. It was a good experience this time. His copay on it is negligible. I think, what was it? It's like $14. There are improvements in the way mental health's treated. Things have gotten better.
How generally are you doing, Nathan?
Good.
I've never been to a protest. I've never led a protest. So going to that protest here in Marquette, the protest was for George Floyd. It was a Say His Name protest. And it was shortly after millions of people watched that video of him being, choked to death by a man kneeling on him. It was very, very hard to watch. I think I see trauma, and I think that it's years of trauma that like no one has ever been able to talk about. I literally like afterwards like broke down and cried, like had to sit down and just like, it was like, whoa, all of this raw emotion is happening and I don't understand it, but all I know is that like I have to do something. Social justice for us mission is to uplift the marginalized voices.
Amplifying the voices of marginalized people in the Marquette community, people that aren't being heard. I joined Social Justice for Us about 2 months, I think, after they were formed officially. 2 days after their initial formation, I had gone to a protest and met up with them.
What makes SJFU so unique is that we're all on the spectrum some way, somehow, whether that's a spectrum on the LGBTQIA, or we even have members that are autistic. We have members that suffer from like deep anxiety issues, deep depression issues. So we're all living and battling life in a way that truly inspire us to make it better. Yes, Milo.
with, high blood pressure and heart and, lung issues running in my family, I wanted to make some life changes because I know as I age, my metabolism slows down, and I learned to cook. When I say cook, I'm talking about boiling eggs. But I learned that I felt better if I ate that way. My blood sugar was stable, I was more hydrated, and it's minimized what probably would have been more catastrophic for my mental health in terms of my ability to cope with my anxiety, even with the meds. I'm never going to be a homeowner again. That's something I have no interest in. It's a change, and it's a needed change.
The only changes I had was, getting mom's groceries, getting my in-laws groceries. They're elderly, and we didn't want them at the stores to go any place to.
What do you mean I'm elderly?
But we didn't want them to get any sickness or illness that they couldn't recover from.
Usually I'm a jewelry maker. I made these bracelets. I'm real good at it. I used to make purses and stuff. But I've always been an artist too, so this gives me so during COVID-19, in the middle of the night, sometimes my favorite time, I just sit up and I go to Pinterest and try to find something that I can draw. And now you're about to see what I can draw. I want it to be more natural, but this is a bird's eye view of a bird's nest. That's a self-portrait. I always wear a hat, but that's my self-portrait.
I'm just moving from a little apartment in Saginaw to a slightly bigger apartment in Saginaw. I took a place that was a little cheaper because my employment was impacted by COVID, and I am going back to school. Just found a place that was a little bigger. I've got a great big dog to look after, so they needed some space.
Is there anything burning in your heart that you want to share with the world?
No.
No.
Do you want to tell the world anything?
No.
Hopefully, this crisis will go away and people will go back to where they are, seeking help whenever they need it. But please get help when you have a mental illness. Go to a psychiatrist, go to a therapist. Don't think that you are your diagnosis. Please don't. You're different. You have a lot of strengths. We got a lot of patients who do very well. If you are really at your low point, if you are suicidal or very psychotic or manic, and if you have to go to the mental health unit for a few days, don't feel bad about it.
Psychiatry has made enormous progress from the days of the asylums. Therapy and medication saved my life, and they've saved the lives of millions of people who have been able to live happy, productive lives in their communities. But millions more are being forgotten. Asylums were never abolished, only rebranded, as mass incarceration, as a homelessness epidemic, as skyrocketing medical bills. The first asylums were not only built to treat people with debilitating psychiatric illnesses, they were also prisons for gay people, autistic people, rebellious women. anyone our society wanted to forget. We cannot fix our mental health care system until we change our mentality about people with psychiatric illnesses. We are not problems. We are people. And we are not going to be forgotten anymore.